The pristine white marble floor of the grand lobby reflected the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights from above. It was a space built for elites, where every single square meter whispered of wealth, power, and absolute authority. At the center of this cold, modern fortress stood Mai, her slender frame trembling and under the weight of dozens of judging eyes. Her hands, heavily calloused at the fingertips from thousands of hours, holding drafting pens, gripped a thick folder of structural blueprints against her chest. Across from her stood Professor Wu, a man whose name was synonymous with architectural royalty in the city. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, radiating an aura of untouchable academic supremacy. Without warning, he raised his arm and struck the folder in Mai's hands with immense force. The thick stack of paper erupted into the air, scattering like wounded birds across the polished floor. "You are nothing but a shameless thief." Mai, Wu's voice boomed through the high-ceilinged lobby, cold and cutting like a razor blade. How dare an assistant, a nobody from a decaying backyard print shop, claim ownership over a $5 million urban ecosystem design? The words echoed brutally against the glass walls, drawing gasps from the elite board members of the international conglomerate, standing nearby. Mai felt the blood drain from her face, her breath catching in her throat, as the humiliation suffocated her. She dropped to her knees, her fingers desperately trying to gather the scattered pages, her tears smudging the ink lines she had spent months perfecting. Through the crowd, a few meters away, stood an older man wearing a faded, oversized blue worker's shirt. His face was deeply lined, etched with the quiet dignity of a lifetime spent under the sun, and his fingers were permanently stained with dark, indelible printing press ink. It was Mr. Min, Mai's father. He had come to the lobby merely to deliver the final physical test prints, only to witness his daughter being publicly destroyed. A powerful executive from the conglomerate stepped forward, looking down at Mai with absolute coldness. "If these allegations are true, not only is your master's degree revoked effective immediately, but your father's old print shop will be demolished without a single cent of compensation for violating our intellectual property clause." The threat hung in the air like a heavy guillotine, ready to drop and shatter their lives forever. Mr. Min remained completely motionless, his face an unreadable mask of absolute silence, his eyes fixed on the scattered papers at his daughter's feet. The story of the blueprints did not begin in that glamorous lobby, but in the dark, rhythmic heart of a 30-year-old printing workshop. Located in a narrow alley, where the scent of fresh paper and industrial grease filled the air, the shop housed a monstrous, mechanical printing press from the 1990s. For 3 decades, Mr. Min had lived by the pulse of this machine. He knew its every cough, its every sigh, and could tell if the pressure rollers were misaligned by a fraction of a millimeter just by listening to the rhythmic metallic clanking. Since his wife passed away 20 years ago, this metal beast had been his only partner in raising Mai. Every dollar of tuition, every box of expensive drafting pencils Mai used, had been paid for by the ink-stained hands of a man who rarely spoke more than 10 words a day. Inside the small, cluttered loft above the workshop, Mai had grown up watching her father's back bent over the heavy iron machinery. But as she grew older, and as the world shifted towards sleek digital screens and sophisticated software, a silent distance began to form between them. Mai became a top student at the university, mastering complex computer-aided design programs, visualizing towering skyscrapers that existed only in pixels. To her, her father's world was a relic of the past, an obsolete, messy trade that belonged in a museum. One evening, just a week before the incident at the lobby, Mai sat at her wooden desk, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She was finalizing the Green Urban Canopy project, a revolutionary architectural blueprint designed to bring living forests into high-rise concrete structures. Mr. Min walked up the creaking wooden stairs, carrying a simple bowl of hot broth he had made for her. He set it down quietly on the edge of the desk, his eyes drifting toward the glowing screen, then down to her hand. He noticed a deep, painful indentation on the side of her middle finger, a physical mark left by the intense force she used when sketching her initial concepts on paper. "You are pressing too hard," Mr. Min said, his voice low and raspy. "The paper remembers the weight of the hand long after the ink dries." Mai didn't look up, her fingers continuing to click the mouse aggressively. "Father, this is digital architecture. Everything is processed by algorithms now, she replied, her tone sharp with exhaustion and a hint of condescension. The computer doesn't care about hand weight, and a traditional print shop can't help me win this international competition. Professor Wu said this project will change the entire industry, and I need to focus. Mr. Min looked at his daughter's tired face, then looked down at his own dark, ink-stained palms. He did not argue, nor did he try to explain the wisdom accumulated through 30 years of touching the physical world. He simply turned around, his uneven footsteps echoing softly down the stairs, leaving her alone with the cold, blue light of her screen. Mai did not know that the very professor she worshipped, the man who promised her a brilliant future, was already preparing to strip everything away from her. The dark undercurrents of academia began to surface the very next morning at the university. Professor Wu sat in his air-conditioned office, turning a golden pen between his smooth fingers as he looked at Mai's digital files. He called her into the room, not to praise her work, but to subtly erect a wall of psychological isolation around her. Mai, your core concept is interesting, but it is raw, unpolished, and frankly, lacks the sophisticated language required by a multinational corporation, Wu said, his voice smooth like oil. An assistant's name on a primary proposal looks unprofessional to international investors. For the sake of the project, I will submit this under my name as the lead architect, and you will be credited as a data compiler. Mai felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized the depth of the betrayal. But Professor, I spent 8 months designing every single structural node, every garden layout, and every water filtration line from scratch. Mai protested, her voice cracking with a mixture of fear and shock. Wu leaned back in his leather chair, his expression instantly hardening into an icy, authoritative glare that brooked no further argument. Without my signature, your master's thesis will never pass the departmental review board. Mai, remember who holds the power to build your career, and who can erase it with a single stroke of a pen. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, completely helpless against the crushing weight of institutional power. By afternoon, the betrayal was complete. The preliminary digital catalog of the project was released to the executive board, and Mai's name was nowhere to be found. She returned to the alley print shop that evening, her spirit entirely broken, refusing to look at her father as she locked herself in the loft upstairs. Mr. Min stood by the ancient mechanical press, listening to the heavy rain start to lash against the grimy glass windows of the workshop. He looked up toward the silent loft, then down at the final hard-copy prints he had prepared, noticing the subtle, microscopic tension lines on the paper that his daughter had never bothered to look at. He knew the storms of the world were rolling in, but he also knew that storms always washed away the dirt to reveal the true foundation underneath. The tension shifted from academic betrayal to an engineering crisis the following afternoon, inside the high-tech presentation room of the international conglomerate. The room was packed with foreign executives, tech specialists, and the media, all waiting for the physical verification prints of the $5 million project. Professor Wu stood confidently at the podium, clicking through his digital slides, basking in the applause of the crowd. However, as the high-speed digital printing systems, brought by the conglomerate, finished rendering the large-scale physical blueprints, a sudden silence fell over the technical team. The head of the engineering department stepped forward, his face pale, as he examined the thick sheets of paper coming off the modern laser printers. The dials and the color bars along the edges of the blueprint were completely distorted, the crucial green hues. The very core of the Green Urban Canopy project appeared as a muddy, washed-out gray. The digital files show absolute perfection in CMYK values, but the physical output is unreadable, the chief engineer announced, his voice trembling under the gaze of the chairman. If we cannot verify the exact pigment absorption and line density on physical media within 24 hours, the International Compliance Board will cancel the entire funding contract. Professor Wu felt a drop of cold sweat roll down his neck, his polished facade instantly cracking as he rushed toward the monitors, shouting commands at the technicians to recalibrate the software. But no matter how many times they re-uploaded the digital files or adjusted the laser density, every single print came out flawed, the ink bleeding into the thorns of the paper. In his panic, looking for a scapegoat to protect his reputation, Wu turned his furious gaze toward Mr. Min, who was standing quietly at the back of the room with a box of blank paper stock. "It is the paper. This garbage backyard print shop provided us with defective, moisture-damaged material to sabotage my masterpiece." Wu roared, pointing an accusing finger at the old man. The chairman of the conglomerate turned his sharp eyes toward Mr. Min, his voice cold and demanding. "Is this true, old man? Is your shop responsible for ruining a multi-million-dollar contract?" Mai, standing in the corner, lowered her head in deep shame and helplessness, believing her father's outdated world had truly brought disaster upon them. Mr. Min did not flinch, nor did he offer a loud defense. He simply walked forward, picked up a discarded, misprinted blueprint from the metal recycling bin, and held it close to his face. Mr. Min looked at the paper. He did not look at the digital color codes or the flashing error lights on the laser printer. Instead, he brought the crumpled page to his face, closing his eyes as his rough, ink-stained thumb slowly caressed the textured edge of the heavy paper stock. He caught the faint, chemical scent of the premium imported ink the conglomerate had used, and then he felt the microscopic, uneven ridges left by the high-speed thermal rollers. To the engineers, the paper was just a flat surface, a blank canvas, to be stamped by a machine. To Mr. Min, it was a living material that reacted to pressure, temperature, and moisture. "The paper is not defective," Mr. Min said, his voice low but steady, cutting through the panicked murmurs of the elite tech team. "The laser is too fast. It burns the surface before the oil in the pigment can settle into the thores of the cotton weave." Professor Wu let out a sharp, mocking laugh, adjusting his silk tie as he looked at the old man with absolute disdain. "Listen to this guy, Fudon, trying to lecture international technicians on digital laser technology. You spend your life turning a rusty crank in a dark alley, old man. You don't even know what a pixel is. Get this lunatic out of here." The chief engineer, desperate for any solution, looked at the chairman, who remained silent, his sharp eyes fixed on the absolute calmness of the old though in. "We have exactly 16 hours left before the international board withdraws the funding," the chairman stated, his voice flat and heavy. "Every minute we waste on theories costs us $50,000. If anyone has a way to make this print correctly, speak now or prepare your legal defense." Mr. Min looked down at the paper one last time, then looked at his daughter, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. Without saying another word, the old man turned around, picked up his simple wooden box of tools, and walked out of the high-tech presentation room, his heavy boots echoing quietly against the marble floor. He did not ask for permission, and he did not look back to see if they were following. By midnight, the high-tech presentation room was completely deserted, leaving only the cold hum of expensive, non-functioning digital printers. Back in the narrow alley, the old printing workshop was bathed in a solitary, warm yellow light. The heavy rain outside beat a furious rhythm against the metal roof, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. Mr. Min stood before his monstrous 19-inch 90s mechanical press, his hands moving with absolute precision as he wiped the heavy iron gears with a kerosene-soaked rag. Mai sat on the creaking wooden stairs leading to the loft, her knees pulled tight against her chest, watching her father with a mixture of anger and despair. "Why are you doing this, father?" she finally burst out, her voice cracking with emotion. "The project is gone. Professor Wu has ruined my name, and the conglomerate is going to take this shop away from us tomorrow. Cleaning that ancient piece of junk won't save us." Mr. Min did not stop his movements. His rough hands continued to glide over the cold steel cylinder of the press. "A machine only reflects the spirit of the person operating it," Mai, the old man said softly, his voice raspy but calm. "Those modern digital printers only look at data, but data doesn't feel the moisture in the air or the weight of the ink. The paper remembers everything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of tissue-thin paper, each sheet only a few micrometers thick, material he had kept carefully preserved for decades. With slow, meticulous movements, he began to insert these tiny paper strips under the heavy iron packing cylinder of the press, adjusting the physical pressure of the machine manually, purely by the feel of his fingertips. Mai watched him, tears of frustration welling in her eyes, still believing that her father's old-world methods were completely useless against a multi-million-dollar corporate crisis. She turned away and went up to the loft, unaware that those tiny strips of paper were about to dismantle a massive academic fraud. The first light of dawn broke through the heavy rain clouds, casting a grim gray light over the city. Inside the old workshop, the air was thick, with the sharp scent of mechanical oil and fresh ink. Mr. Min had not slept a single minute. His face was pale with exhaustion, but his eyes remained sharp, focused entirely on the heavy iron lever of the press. Mai descended the stairs, her eyes red from a sleepless night spent staring at her useless laptop screen. She looked at her father, who was carefully stacking a pristine ream of heavy cotton paper onto the feeding tray of the old machine. "It is time to go, Mai," Mr. Min said quietly, wiping his stained hands on a sun cloth. "Pack your original hand-sketched notebooks." Mai shook her head, her voice hollow. "Father, what's the point? They won't even let us cross the threshold of the building with that old box of paper." "We are not going to their building," Mr. Min replied, his tone carrying an unusual, unshakable weight that made Mai freeze. "They are coming here." Before Mai could ask what he meant, the loud sound of a luxury car engine echoed through the narrow alleyway, followed by the screech of brakes. The rusty iron doors of the workshop were pushed open, and a small group of people hurried inside to escape the morning drizzle. It was the chairman of the conglomerate, accompanied by his chief engineer and two stone-faced security guards. Behind them, looking disheveled and frantic, was Professor Wu, his expensive suit now damp and wrinkled from the rain. The chairman looked around the cramped, ink-scented workshop, his sharp eyes taking in the ancient machinery, before landing on Mr. Min. "Your chief engineer called my assistant at 3 in the morning, old man," the chairman said, his voice flat and dangerous. "He said you claimed you could produce the exact compliance print required by the International Board using this junk." Professor Wu stepped forward, his voice high and nervous as he tried to maintain control. "Mr. Chairman, this is an absolute waste of your valuable time. This old man is a fraud, a desperate mechanic, trying to extort money from the company before we evict him. My digital team has been working all night. We just need a few more hours on the laser system." The chairman did not even look at Wu. He kept his eyes locked onto Mr. Min's calm face. "You have exactly 10 minutes before my car leaves for the airport to meet the International Compliance Board," the chairman stated, pulling out a solid gold pocket watch. "Show me what your 30 years of experience can do, or the demolition crew arrives at noon." Mr. Min did not answer Professor Wu's insults. He slowly walked to the ancient control panel, his hand reaching for the heavy iron power switch. With a forceful downward pull, the workshop shuddered as the massive electric motor came to life. The ancient mechanical printing press groaned, its giant cast iron gears beginning to rotate with a deep, rhythmic clanking that vibrated through the wooden floorboards. The chief engineer stepped closer, his eyes wide with professional curiosity, as he watched the old man feed the first sheet of heavy cotton paper into the mechanical grips. Unlike the silent, sterile digital laser printers at the corporate headquarters, this machine was a living beast of pressure and oil. Mr. Min stood over the ink fountain, his stained fingers adjusting the flow valves by a fraction of an inch, regulating the thick, premium green pigment based entirely on the way it glistened under the yellow light bulb. "Watch closely," Mr. Min said to the chief engineer, his voice easily carrying over the mechanical roar. The digital laser burns the paper fibers, creating a static charge that rejects the oil. This machine uses raw physical pressure, 2 tons of dead weight, to force the pigment deep into the heart of the thores. He pulled the engagement lip, and the first massive iron cylinder rolled over the inked plate, striking the heavy paper with a loud, thunderous thud. The paper slid out onto the receiving tray. The chief engineer rushed forward, pulling a high-magnification jeweler's loupe from his pocket and pressing it against the fresh print. His jaw dropped, his hands beginning to shake as he looked through the lens. The line clarity. "It's absolute perfection," the engineer whispered, his voice trembling with sheer disbelief. "The green gradient is flawless. Every single structural line is sharp down to 5 micrometers. Our $1 million laser systems couldn't achieve this level of density in 1,000 years." The chairman stepped forward, his cold eyes narrowing as he took the blueprint from the tray, his wealthy gaze stunned by the rich, deep quality of the physical output. Professor Wu felt a sudden wave of panic hit him, his face turning an ash-gray color as he realized the old man had just solved the impossible crisis in a matter of seconds. But that's not all, Mr. Min said, his voice dropping into a heavy, unshakable calm that silenced the entire room. He didn't turn off the machine. He let the rhythmic thunder of the iron cylinders continue to echo through the wooden floorboards. The old man reached onto Mai's desk and picked up her original hand-sketched notebooks, flipping to a page containing the raw, early concepts of the urban canopy. He placed a fresh sheet of paper onto the feeding tray, but this time, he didn't apply any ink to the primary plates. Instead, he adjusted the tiny tissue-thin paper strips he had hidden under the pressure rollers the night before, increasing the mechanical compression to its absolute physical limit. Professor Wu claims this project was designed entirely on his corporate computers, Mr. Min continued, his eyes locking onto Wu's sweating face. But a digital file can be copied, pasted, and stolen with a single click. What you cannot copy is the physical weight of the creator's hand. He pulled the heavy lever down, and the machine struck the blank paper with a deafening crack. The sheet slid into the tray, completely devoid of color, but as the bright morning light hit the surface, the chief engineer gasped. Under the massive, precise pressure of Mr. Min's calibrated cylinders, the microscopic indentations on the paper weave began to cast deep, clear shadows. Visible to everyone in the room were the ghost-like, embedded lines of the original architectural sketches, lines that matched the precise, heavy-handed drawing style of Mai's notebooks perfectly. More importantly, pressed deeply into the bottom right corner of the sheet, by the sheer force of the iron rollers, was a distinct, raised watermark, the embossed personal stamp of Mai's initials, which she always pressed into her sketchpads, using a dry steel tool. Because Professor Wu had simply scanned her flat drawings to convert them into digital pixels, his files had carried over the exact line paths, but he had completely missed the physical depth embedded within the original sheets. By choosing to print using raw physical force, rather than digital lasers, Mr. Min had forced the paper to reveal its true, undeniable origin. These physical indentations can only exist if the original sketch pad was pressed directly against the master plate. During the initial transfer process, the chief engineer shouted, his eyes wide with absolute realization. This digital file didn't come from a computer algorithm. It was traced from a physical notebook. This girl is the sole creator of the entire design. Professor Wu backed away until his spine hit the cold brick wall of the workshop, his hands trembling violently as the entire illusion of his academic genius shattered into dust before his eyes. The chairman looked away from the paper and turned his eyes slowly toward Professor Wu. The coldness in his gaze was sharp enough to freeze the air in the crowded workshop. "You lied to me," the chairman said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You brought a stolen file to my company, risked our reputation with the international board, and tried to destroy a family to cover your own incompetence." Wu's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his smooth, arrogant voice completely gone. "Mr. Chairman, please. It was just a technical misunderstanding. The girl was my assistant. Her work belongs to my department," he stammered, his fingers clawing at the collar of his damp shirt. "Your department is finished," the chairman interrupted, waving his hand with absolute finality. "Effective immediately. The conglomerate is pulling all research grants from your university, and our legal team will file a formal lawsuit against you for corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, and defamation." The two stone-faced security guards stepped forward, grabbing Wu by his arms and dragging him out into the rain. His expensive leather shoes skidded helplessly across the wet gravel of the alley, his desperate cries swallowed by the thunder outside. The man who had stood so high in the grand marble lobby was now nothing more than a ruined name, thrown out like the garbage he had accused others of being. Mai watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest, the immense weight of the past 8 months of fear and isolation evaporating into the fresh morning air. The old workshop grew quiet again, leaving only the steady, rhythmic hum of the machine that had saved her life. The chairman turned back toward the ancient printing press, his eyes lingering on the heavy iron cylinders, before settling on Mai. He took a deep, deliberate breath, and pulled a solid gold fountain pen from his breast pocket, placing it gently on top of the newly printed, perfect blueprint. "Your father was right, young lady," the chairman said, his voice softening into an expression of genuine respect. "Data can be bought and sold, but the soul of a true creator cannot be simulated. He reached out his hand to Mai, offering her warm, firm handshake. As of this moment, the conglomerate formally offers you the position of lead chief architect for the entire $5 million Green Urban Canopy project. You will have full executive control over every design decision, and your name will be the only name on the international filing papers. Mai's hand shook slightly as she shook his hand, her eyes filling with tears of pure relief and validation. The chairman then turned to Mr. Min, looking around the small, weathered workshop with a new appreciation for the history contained within its walls. And as for this print shop, we are completely canceling the demolition order, the chairman stated firmly. Instead, the conglomerate will provide a full grant to preserve this space as a historic landmark, a museum of traditional printing and mechanical arts for the city. And we would be honored if you, Mr. Min, would accept the position of lifetime technical director with a corporate pension to ensure you never have to work a grueling night shift again. Mr. Min looked at the chairman, his deeply lined face remaining calm and grounded, showing no greed or pride. He slowly bowed his head in a quiet gesture of gratitude, accepting the offer not for the wealth it promised, but for the security it gave to his daughter's future. The machine has done its job for today, the old man said softly, reaching over to turn off the main breaker, bringing the thunderous roar to a gentle, resting halt. The chairman and his team departed, their luxury vehicle disappearing into the distance, leaving the narrow alley blanketed in a peaceful, rain-washed silence. Inside the workshop, the ancient iron beast stood quiet, its massive cylinders resting after the morning storm. Mai stood by the receiving tray, her eyes staring at the perfect green blueprint that bore her name, her true identity, and her future. She looked at her father, who was already bent over the gears, carefully wiping the excess green ink with a piece of worn cloth, just as he had done every day of her life. Her gaze fell upon his hands, calloused and deeply stained with black ink that could never be washed away. Suddenly, the memories of her childhood came rushing back. The long nights he spent working in this cold shop, the quiet sacrifices he made to buy her expensive drawing laptops, and the gentle way he used to check on her when she was exhausted. She realized that while she was busy chasing the glamorous, fleeting illusions of the digital world, her father had been guarding the heavy, undeniable truth of reality. The tears she had held back for months finally broke free, and Mai walked over, dropping to her knees beside the ancient machine, burying her face against her father's sewn trousers. "I am so sorry, father," she cried, her voice cracking with deep regret and immense gratitude. "I thought you were trapped in the past. I thought your world was broken. But you were the only one who truly understood the depth of my work." Mr. Min stopped wiping the gears, his movements freezing for a brief moment. He slowly looked down at his daughter, a soft, rare smile breaking through the deep lines of his weathered face. He didn't speak a long lecture. He didn't boast about his victory over the wealthy elite or the arrogant professor. He simply reached down with his dark, ink-stained hand and gently wiped a stray tear from her cheek, leaving a faint smudged mark of printer's ink upon her skin, a mark of protection, a mark of love. "A father doesn't need to understand every pixel on your screen," Mai, the old man said softly, his voice echoing warmly in the quiet workshop. "A father only needs to hold the weight when the world tries to crush you." In a world obsessed with fast data, flashy credentials, and instant validation, we often forget that the truest values are built on patience, integrity, and the quiet sacrifices of those who love us, without asking for anything in return. Never look down on the calloused hands of your parents, for those are the very hands that possess the strength to lift you up when the rest of the world turns its back. What is the greatest sacrifice your parents have ever made to protect your dreams? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to honor the silent heroes in your life.